There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Moments so profound they crack open the foundation of who we thought we were. For Richard Montgomery, that moment came on a Thursday afternoon in the rain when he discovered his 12-year-old daughter sitting on a street corner in a neighborhood he barely recognized, eating a sandwich she'd bought from a corner store instead of being where she was supposed to be, where he believed she was. At school, Richard Montgomery was a man accustomed to control, generational wealth, political connections, a mansion in Brentwood that had graced the pages of Architectural Digest. His name opened doors. His influence shaped outcomes. In his world, problems were solved with resources, connections, and decisive action. But standing there in the rain, watching Maya, the daughter he and his wife Catherine had adopted 5 years earlier, sitting alone and drenched on that curb, Richard realized that everything he thought he understood about fatherhood was about to unravel. Maya had come into their lives at 7 years old, after spending 4 years cycling through the foster system. 4 years of temporary homes, temporary families, temporary hope. She'd been quiet when they first met her. Careful. The kind of child who said thank you too often and apologized for things that weren't her fault. Catherine had fallen in love with her immediately. Richard had too, though he would never have admitted how deeply that first hesitant smile had affected him. They'd given her everything they thought a child could want. A private school education, ballet lessons, a bedroom designed like something from a dream, birthday parties with ponies and professional caterers. They'd introduced her at country club brunches, brought her into their social circle, posed for photos that captured what appeared to be a perfect family. For 5 years, that appearance had seemed like reality. But appearances, Richard was about to learn, can be the most dangerous kind of lie. The changes had started small. Maya began declining family events, claiming stomach aches or too much homework. Richard and Catherine had attributed it to typical adolescent moodiness. Then Catherine found Maya's ballet slippers in the trash. When asked why she wanted to quit, Maya had simply gone silent. Richard, absorbed in the financial section that morning, had barely looked up. If she didn't want to go, he'd said, "Don't force her." Over the following 2 months, Maya had become a ghost in her own home. She stopped joining them for dinner, stopped talking about her day. She'd retreat to her room each evening and stay there until morning. Richard told himself it was normal, a phase, the natural pull of adolescent independence. He told himself that right up until he saw her in the rain. The confrontation that followed was brief and tense. Maya's face when she saw him wasn't surprise, it was fear. The drive home was silent except for the windshield wipers. When they arrived, Catherine took one look at them, Richard soaking wet, Maya trembling, and immediately understood something was deeply wrong. And then Maya said the words that would change everything. "I can't go to school anymore." 2 months. For 2 months, Maya had been leaving the house each morning, but never arriving at school. 2 months of wandering to libraries, parks, anywhere but the place she was supposed to be. 2 months of sitting in the rain, eating cheap sandwiches, completely alone. Richard demanded to know why, and Maya's answer cut through him like glass. "Because they hate me there." The story that emerged was one of systematic, relentless cruelty, not the obvious kind, not violence or overt aggression, something more insidious. Maya described how her classmates whispered just loud enough for her to hear, how they called her charity case in the hallways, how they questioned whether she was really Richard and Catherine's daughter or just a tax deduction, how they asked why she talked white, how they speculated openly about when her parents would get tired of their little project and send her back. There were 3 girls in particular, student council members, children of doctors and lawyers. They'd befriended Maya at first, or so she'd thought. One had even come over to the house. The next day, everyone at school knew the details: the pool, the theater room, the art collection. And suddenly, Maya wasn't a classmate. She was an imposter, living a life she hadn't earned. But perhaps most painful was Mr. Harrison, Maya's English teacher. He was black, and Maya had hoped he might understand. Instead, he'd pulled her aside after class one day to tell her that living in Brentwood didn't make her one of them, that she shouldn't forget where she came from. The problem was, Maya didn't know where she came from. 4 years in foster care had erased most of her early memories. She had no connection to her birth parents, no cultural heritage she could point to and claim. She was simply Maya. But to Richard's world, she was too black, and to the black community at her school, she was too white. She fit nowhere. The rumors intensified. Students spread stories that Richard and Catherine had adopted Maya for diversity optics, that they claimed her on their taxes as a business expense, that they'd eventually grow bored and discard her. And slowly, insidiously, Maya had begun to wonder if maybe they were right. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere, leave a comment below. This story is for you. Richard's immediate instinct was anger. How could Maya have lied for 2 months? How could she have deceived them so completely? But as she spoke, as the words poured out of her in broken, desperate fragments, something shifted in him. He began to see the situation not through his eyes, but through hers. Every time they dropped her off in their Mercedes, she became a spectacle. Every country club event where they introduced her as our adopted daughter reinforced the message that she was different, that she was other, that she was a charity project rather than simply their child. Richard had thought he was showing her off with pride. Maya had experienced it as being put on display. The realization devastated him. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He replayed 5 years of memories through a new lens. Every expensive gift he'd given her, thinking it was love. Every time he dismissed Catherine's concerns because he was too busy or too certain that wealth could solve any problem. Every moment he'd congratulated himself on being a good father while completely missing his daughter's pain. At 2 a.m, he went to Maya's room. The door was closed, but light showed underneath. When he entered, he found her sitting on her bed, still dressed, knees pulled to her chest. The room was beautiful. Catherine had designed it with care, but it was sterile. No posters, no photos of friends, just expensive furniture arranged like a hotel suite. Richard apologized. Not the shallow kind of apology adults give children to smooth over discomfort, but a real acknowledgement of failure. He told her he'd been blind, that he'd built her a beautiful cage and called it love, that he'd been so focused on giving her material comfort that he'd never asked what she actually needed. And Maya, exhausted and vulnerable, finally told him everything. The bullying had started in September, at the beginning of 7th grade. The 3 girls had seemed friendly at first, inviting her to sit with them, asking about her life. When one came to visit and saw the extent of Richard's wealth, everything changed. The next day, whispers followed Maya through the halls. Charity case. She didn't earn any of it. Her real parents must be so disappointed. The psychological warfare was precise and unrelenting. These weren't impulsive acts of teenage cruelty. They were calculated attacks designed to make Maya question her worth, her place, her very identity. And they worked. Every time Richard and Catherine took her to one of their social events, Maya felt the stares. People smiled and said kind things, but their eyes betrayed their questions. Why did you choose her? What makes her special? And Maya had no answer because she'd been asking herself the same question. She didn't know why Richard and Catherine had chosen her out of all the children in foster care. She didn't know what made her worthy of their love. And she lived in constant terror that one day they'd realize they'd made a mistake. Richard pulled his daughter into his arms and told her something he should have said years ago, that they'd chosen her not because of what she looked like or where she came from, but because of who she was. That when they'd first met her, she'd asked if their house had a library. A 7-year-old who'd been through hell, and all she wanted to know was if there were books. That was the moment he and Catherine had known. This was their daughter. The next morning, Richard did something unprecedented. He canceled every meeting on his calendar and drove to Maya's school. The principal, Dr. Sandra Whitmore, greeted him with professional courtesy that quickly evaporated when Richard explained why he was there. His daughter had been skipping school for 2 months. She'd been bullied, harassed, and subjected to racist commentary from both students and staff, and nobody had noticed or cared. Dr. Whitmore tried to deflect. Surely there'd been a misunderstanding. These were serious accusations. But Richard wasn't interested in explanations. He laid out exactly what was going to happen. The school would investigate every incident Maya had described. They would address the students involved and their parents. They would have a serious conversation with Mr. Harrison about appropriate professional boundaries, and they would implement a real anti-bullying program, not just one that existed on paper to satisfy concerned parents. When Dr. Whitmore hesitated, Richard made his position clear. He would pull Maya from the school and make it his personal mission to ensure every parent in the district knew exactly why. His connections at major newspapers would guarantee the story reached national attention. An elite private school's failure to protect a black adopted child from racist harassment would make compelling headlines. The threat worked. Dr. Whitmore promised a full investigation by the end of the week. But Richard knew confronting the school was only the beginning. The real work, the harder work, was just starting. That weekend, he asked Maya a question he should have asked 5 years earlier. What do you need? Her answer was simple and heartbreaking. She wanted to meet other kids like her. Adopted children, particularly black children in white families who understood the specific complexity of her experience. She wanted to learn about her culture, not from textbooks written by white educators, but from authentic sources that could help her understand the history, the stories, the richness of black identity, and she wanted to transfer schools. The last request stung. Richard had spent years bragging about the prestigious academy Maya attended, but looking at his daughter, seeing hope flicker in her eyes for the first time in months, he realized his pride meant nothing. Maya wanted to attend Lincoln Heights, a public school with greater diversity. Richard thought about the country club conversations he'd have to navigate, the raised eyebrows, the carefully worded questions about educational standards. Then he thought about Maya sitting alone in the rain. Lincoln Heights it is, he said. The months that followed transformed their family. Richard, who'd spent his entire adult life believing that success meant control and power meant distance, discovered something radical. Listening was harder than leading. He joined Maya at therapy sessions with Dr. Amara Johnson, a black woman who specialized in transracial adoption. Dr. Johnson didn't coddle him or make excuses. She held up a mirror and forced him to examine every assumption, every microaggression, every moment he'd chosen his own comfort over his daughter's well-being. You can't love her despite her blackness, Dr. Johnson told him during one session. You have to love her because of all of who she is. Her blackness isn't a footnote to her story. It's the story. And if you can't embrace that, you're failing her. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever said to Richard. And she was absolutely right. He began reading. Not just articles, but comprehensive histories and memoirs. He learned about redlining and the school-to-prison pipeline. He learned about the insidious ways racism operated in systems he'd never questioned because those systems had always worked in his favor. He learned about black family structures, about chosen families and collective care, about survival and joy and resistance. He learned about his daughter's world. Meanwhile, Maya flourished at Lincoln Heights. She joined the Black Student Union. She made real friends who understood her particular kind of complicated. She started wearing her natural hair, abandoning the expensive salon treatments that had straightened it. She spoke up in class, her voice growing stronger each day. She came home with stories instead of silence. One evening, she walked into Richard's study and dropped a book on his desk. The Blue Sky by Toni Morrison. You should read this, she said. Richard picked up the book, his throat tight. Yeah? Yeah. If you're going to be my dad, you need to understand where I'm coming from. This is part of it. After she left, Richard sat alone and cried. If this story is resonating with you, don't just watch. Subscribe to our Black Diary. We tell stories that matter, stories that challenge us, stories that help us become better versions of ourselves. 6 months after that rainy Thursday, Richard and Maya stood together outside the corner store where he'd first found her. This time, they were there intentionally. Inside, the elderly Korean owner, Mr. Park, looked up and immediately smiled when he saw Maya. She introduced him to Richard, explaining that Mr. Park had been kind to her during those difficult months. He'd let her sit in the store when the weather was particularly bad. He'd never asked questions or made her feel unwelcome. She was alone, cold. What else would I do? Mr. Park said simply. As they left, Maya slipped her hand into Richard's. Such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For trying to understand, for listening, for not giving up on me when I was sure you would." Richard knelt on the dirty sidewalk, ignoring how his expensive pants absorbed the grime, so he could look his daughter in the eye. "Maya, listen to me. I failed you in 1,000 ways. I let my privilege blind me. I let my pride silence you. I built you a beautiful cage and called it love, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to do better. But giving up on you? That was never an option. You are my daughter, my heart, my purpose, and I am so grateful that you gave me the chance to be the father you deserve." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, baby girl." They embraced on that street corner as rain began to fall again, a baptism of sorts. When they finally pulled apart, Maya suggested they get out of the rain. Richard laughed and agreed. But neither of them moved immediately, because sometimes healing requires standing in the rain. Sometimes it requires being uncomfortable. And sometimes love isn't about protection. It's about presence. Richard Montgomery learned something that changed him forever. Being a parent isn't about giving your child the world. It's about being present in their world. It's about listening when silence would be easier, learning when you think you already know everything, and loving, truly loving, not just the parts of them that fit comfortably into your life, but all of who they are. Maya didn't need a mansion. She needed a father who would stand in the rain beside her. And finally, she had one. This is the kind of story we tell here at our Black Diary. Stories of pain and resilience, of failure and redemption, of the messy, complicated journey toward understanding. If this story touched you, take a moment. Think about the Mayas in your life, the voices you might not be hearing, the struggles you might not be seeing, and then listen, really listen, because that's where healing begins.